We did have a request, and we talked about doing this, and I think we have a little time left to talk about books that you might read in preparation for this. And Chris, because I know you're as the host, co-host, main host, senior historian, you're the most prepared on this topic. We'll start with you for some book suggestions.
Well, I think to get a good sense of the overall fight around Khan, it's called a book called Khan, Anvil of Victory by Alexander McKee. I think it's probably the best one-volume history that explains all the different British operations, Operation Goodwood, Charnwood, Totalize, there's bunches of them. And he weaves it into a pretty good, solid narrative. So I would recommend that. And then my second go-to would be John Keegan's Six Armies in Normandy. It's a masterpiece, and what I like so much about it is he focuses on the different nations involved, takes the story of their army in one particular part of the campaign, and really kind of does a deep dive on how the soldiers from that place fought and how they changed over the course of the Normandy campaign. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking when I saw you make that suggestion, it had been a long time since I've read that book, so I've pulled it out and have it ready to go through again. Yeah. Mr. Brogy.
Yeah, right now I'm going through Craig Simon's Neptune for the second time. I mean, Operation Neptune, excuse me. I know he's been on the show twice, 3 times or so.
More than you, Matt. But
yeah, definitely.
Only one more than you now. And actually, you might be tied. It might be the same. You might have been on the same number of times now.
He's like the Steve Martin of Saturday Night Live.
But you might be the
get a
Martin
smoking
Short
jacket
of,
at 3
of History Happy Hour.
Yeah, but that book is just, the more I read it, you want to understand the formation of Operation Neptune / Overlord. It's so well written, and the detail is great. But then also pertaining to the Masterclass tour, he discusses in great detail the seizure of Cherbourg from the naval side. You don't think about the Navy playing a role in capturing Cherbourg, but there's a bunch of coastal fortifications protecting Cherbourg. And there's U.S. naval task forces that get deployed, and they have amazing duels with these coastal fortifications. And you got to read it, and you got to get that book if you don't have it, for sure.
And I'm sure he also talks about another thing we haven't touched on in this talk: the storm, the terrible storm that knocks out the
mulberries,
the American mulberry, and the impact that has on the campaign.
That's right.
Yeah. Let's see, Hugh, what have you got here for?
I've got an old classic, Decision in Normandy by Carlo D'Este, which is first of all, it's not as vast as some of the tomes on D-Day, but it's such an efficient book. It covers so much ground within a digestible space. He has, I think, a really good understanding of the.
Keep holding that there, Matt. Keep going, Hugh.
He also has some really good maps in it, which aren't too confusing. Just explains his case really, really well. And I think he's got a fantastic eye for a battlefield.
And I want to add, I think the other thing I love so much about that book is that he's an American historian, but I think he has a very balanced view of Montgomery and Montgomery's command in Normandy.
Yeah,
I don't know of another author that analyzes the issues and controversies with Montgomery more or better than
D'Este. I would agree. Yeah. I would agree.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to choose a second book?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Someone else will have to hold it up, but
this will make Chris laugh a bit.
Testing everybody's library. I know, Eric, you've got the biggest library, so I'm sure whatever Hugh comes up with, you've got it.
I'll try. Well, this will be interesting. It's a book called March Past, which is the autobiography by Lord Lovat, who was the famous commando leader, the man who led the commanders across Pegasus Bridge to get to the high ground. It's not a biography, so it takes you from his early days. You understand where he comes from, what he's about, so you understand his character. But he gives such an insight into the way that commandos were trained and applied as shock troops on the British and Commonwealth beaches. And his story about how they had to hold the line on the high ground above Pegasus Bridge is absolutely fascinating, not least because he describes how they were able to link up really efficiently with one of the gunboats. I think it was HMS Ramillies or Roberts. I can't quite remember which one. So when they see a panzer attack developing in the woods behind them, they can whistle up on the radio, where their 14.5-inch shells come roaring over. He says they come roaring over. Sounds exactly like an express train, right on target. But it gives a lot of tiny little insights that you don't necessarily get from a general book on a battlefield.
Yeah. And Rick?
Oh, so I have a couple. I would first a book that I'm very familiar with is Beyond the Beachhead by Joe Belkowski, and of course the first 150 pages. It's about the 29th Infantry Division. So the first 150 pages are about the preparation and about Normandy, but then the 150 pages after that are about the breakout, about the battle for St. Lo, about the death of Major Howie in St. Lo, which is I'm sure a place that we're going to visit on this trip. And Joe's amazing, and so I always like to tout his work.
Absolutely.
And then I would also say, just if you're going to go for a classic, Breakout and Pursuit by Martin Blumenson, which is kind of the original, the original, and both of these are on the American side, so I recognize that's a bias, but they're both, and Beyond the Beachhead is a smaller book. Breakout and Pursuit is a bigger book.
It's truly a light read.
Yeah, I think this is actually real metal on the side because it's such a heavy book. But those
you can't carry that on. You got to check that when you fly.
That's
yeah.
You have to ship it in advance, I think. But those are the ones that are on my list. So, listen.
Eric,
do we have it, Chris? Do we have any other questions that we have to answer from people?
Eric's book first. Yeah.
Oh, any translations of German books? Ron wants to know.
Well, Hans von Lucht did a book that talks quite a bit about the armored battles around Caen, and so that I would recommend very strongly. There are some books written by some members of the 12th SS that, they're
that you would not recommend so strongly.
Yeah, I don't feel quite as good about, but
there's a book that is not about Normandy at all, but that is just an amazing book called The German War. I'm looking at it right here.
By Stargart.
Yeah, which is if you're interested in kind of walking through the entire war, all theaters and homeland, from the point of view of the German soldiers and the German families, that's a pretty amazing book. And somebody mentioned D-Day Through German Eyes, which doesn't necessarily deal with the further Normandy campaign, but gives you a good impact there.
And I think we've gotten a lot of requests for book lists. So maybe when this is all said and done, Rick and I will sit down and type up the titles and post it on our webpage.
We'll post it, but we'll send out a special newsletter, a special History Happy Hour newsletter. So, if you're not signed up, you can go to historyhappyhour.com, and that little thing will come up after you're there for 5 or 10 seconds. You're like, this is really annoying, but that'll let you sign up for the newsletter, or you can go to the contact page there and sign up. And
Eric has a book still.
I do.
I'm sorry, Eric.
No,
really,
I forgot Matt before. I forgot Eric now.
It's a coloring book, actually.
No,
it just seems like you've been talking so much, Eric. I assumed we'd gotten to you.
Well, that was my assumption as well, till Matt reminded me. The book I have is it's When You Get to the Ground, and it's the book that made me appreciate the fight up the peninsula, and it came from a family tour. I took 6 members of one family whose late patriarch had been a private with the 4th Division, 22nd Infantry, landed on D-Day, fought all the way through the war.
Wow.
And it's just a simple book called War Stories. There are 2 volumes, and it's just a series of, grunt level accounts of each day fighting up. And it's
all 4th Division, Eric?
Yeah, it's just 4th Division. The Poison Ivy, or as we say, 4 lieutenants heading north. As a former lieutenant, I think that's hilarious. But and so I was trying to research this family's, their patriarch's personal experience. So we went through some small towns that he fought in, and he got wounded, but getting an appreciation for just the day-to-day life of an American infantryman slogging it up the peninsula that really gave me a better appreciation.
Nice. Yeah.